How's it going, YouTube? SamuraiRevolution here, and today we are going to do our China nation review. And we're just going to jump straight into it here. So we're going to continue our trend with these nation reviews. And I played China, I think 5 matches. I got a 1v1 through 4v4, and then trio match in. And they were pretty good. A little different in comparison to the other nations in the game. But overall, I really enjoyed my experience with them. And we're just going to jump straight in here. So civilization bonus is that they train with banner armies, which means that they basically train in groups. You're not going to be able to individually train units specifically like you want. They have to be trained in blocks, and it depends on the type of army what kind of units come out of those blocks. So we'll get into that a little more in-depth later. But it's kind of an advantage and disadvantage. Depending on how you look at it. From my point of view, it's pretty even on both. There's pros and cons, but overall, I think it is a pro early on, but it's a con later on, and I'll get into that later. And then their second thing is they support 220 population, which is fantastic, man. That is so good late game. I can't even explain to you how amazing it is. So yeah, that's just a great perk to have. Later in the game, you can easily overwhelm your opponents, and because the Chinese units are a little cheaper and weaker in comparison to other nations, similar to Russia, they can compensate with that because they have the extra population. So we're going to move down to the bottom left block there, and now is my favorite unit combo. And I also want to add the hand mortars into this. I didn't have enough space to really put in there, and I'm going to talk about it later. But basically, it's the Old Han Army and hand mortar combo. That was my favorite. Old Han Army Age 2 is great. You get 3 Chuko Nu, which are basically crossbowmen, and then you get 3, I think it's Quang, pikemen, Chang, I don't know how to say it, I'm sorry. And they're essentially pikes. So Chuko Nu are pretty good because they reload quicker, and they have really good multiplier cards that you can get as well. Which is, one is it increases the multiplier by 1. So I think it increases from 2 to 3 multiplier, which is a really big deal. And overall, these guys are solid. They do just as well as skirmishers, and they cost wood, so you can get them pretty easily early on in the game. Later in the game, they're more difficult to get, but with the Old Han reforms, these guys are amazing. So I'm just going to spend a minute to talk about this card, because this card is essential for China, in my gameplay at least. I used it every single game because I loved it so much. And basically what it is for the Old Han Army, which are the Chuko Nu and the Chang Pikes, there's a multiplier of 100 it doubles all their stats. So all their stats are multiplied by 100%. So for example, if they had 50 hit points, they'll have 100 hit points. And the difference maker is that you have to pay 50 more percent for the units, which is an amazing trade-off. You literally get double the units for half the price. Insane. It's such a great card, and not many people talk about it. I never really hear it too much because not many people play China in the first place, but it's not talked about, and that card is great. And then there's also a card that increases all unit stats by 8%, which is another great card. So you get 108% 2 cards. These guys are tanks, basically. And you wouldn't expect it because they're crossbows and pikes. You're like, oh, these crossbows and pikes, what is this guy doing? But you can get the Imperial upgrades for them, and they're so good when they have the hand mortars behind them. And we're just going to stroll straight over to hand mortars there. I love the hand mortars. They're kind of like the elephants for India. They are an anti-artillery and an anti-building unit. So they have extreme range, the same range as culverins. So you can knock out other artillery extremely well. And they cost 1 population, so you can get a bunch of them. And they're really annoying to come up against because it sounds like they're taking out your town in seconds, because there's 20 mortar shots going off, but they do tiny damage in comparison to the regular mortars, so it takes a bunch of volleys of the hand mortars to be effective. But they're so annoying to come up against because they have so many shots, and it's just overwhelming to come up and fight against because you have to take out so many of them. And like overall, I love them. They're really good. The only issue is on the other side is that they're annoying to use micro-wise because they can attack regular units. So, for example, if someone has cannons in the back of their army and you don't micro your hand mortars to attack those cannons, they're automatically just going to shoot some random pikes to the right of them or something and not use that fire effectively because they don't have a multiplier against pikes. They only have it against other artillery and buildings. So they're basically useless at that point. So you really have to micro them very well. But when microed correctly, they're awesome with the combination of the Old Han army. And that's what I use for a majority of my games, and it was pretty effective. The only downside about this combo is that it does cost wood and food. So later in the game when wood is low, it's going to be a little difficult to keep it going. But you can easily transform over to the rice paddies and then get your skirmisher and sword unit combo with the Chinese. So you can do that too. And then also sometimes I toss in some flamethrowers in there, which are really good too. Just a little bit different. They go well with the pikes because the pikes draw the fire from other units. Like they take hit points while the flamethrowers do damage, like kind of behind them. So it can be pretty good. You just gotta be careful with them because they are very slow. So we're gonna move down to the disciple there. So this is a unit trained by your explorer, kind of like the war dogs for the Spanish. And depending on the age, you can train a different amount with them. And if you get the white, I think it's a white pagoda wonder, then you can get more disciples depending on the age. So if you get the age 2, you can get like 5 or 6 more, or 5 or 6 total. Well, I can only have like 3 without it. But a very underrated unit, honestly. They do very good damage against light infantry. So they are essentially, if you hear me out here, they're essentially a cavalry unit without the speed, like for the multipliers, without the speed. So like, for example, you're not going to go raid villagers with these guys, although they are extremely annoying to come up and fight against. You're not going to go around raiding villagers with these guys, but army-wise, you're going to take out light infantry with them. So if they have, for example, in my games, he had a bunch of streetlets. If you use your disciples against streetlets, they'll knock them out in a couple of hits because they have such good multipliers against them. So you can focus your cavalry on raiding their villagers while you have these guys in the battle. So that's also a really good combo. And then you can just train them for food only. They only cost 50 food. So that's great as well. So if you pair these guys up with the Old Han Army Age 2, and you send in the 7 Steppy Rider Cav card, which is also a really, really good card. I'll get in that later. Then the multipliers with what you have is really, really effective. You have a really good army Age 2, like very balanced. And it's pretty simple to get as long as you know the build order, which is also pretty simple. It's just a little different because the villages and the banner army, you have to kind of be careful with that. But I'll get in that a little bit later. So I'm going to move down to the Iron Flail and the Meteor Hammer. So these guys basically combo together. One is really good against light infantry, and the other is really good against artillery, but they're both decent. And they have great multipliers, and you get 2 each when you train them, and they all train from the War Academy, so you only have 1 military building. But overall, these guys are solid. I think the Chinese Cav is really underrated because they do have great multipliers. The only problem is that they don't have a train time card, or they might have they might only have 1, but they don't have as quick as the infantry do for the Chinese, because Chinese have 2 infantry train time cards, which are very effective, but they only have the only 1 for the cavalry, so they don't come out nearly as quick. So you have to be aware of that, which really lowers their effectiveness. But if on the battlefield, they are very effective, and I like them a lot, so I would definitely use them. And then I'm just going to talk about the Steppy Riders real quick. There's an Age 2 card that sends 7 of them out. They cost 1 population, and they're essentially like Cossacks that are a little weaker, but you get so many of them that you can just overwhelm your opponents if they're trying like herd in or something, to the point where they can't run around your units because you have so many of them. And like they'll take a bunch of hits to take out the villager, but since you have so many of them, they can't get around it. So it's kind of a win loss scenario because you have more guys, but they're ineffective by themselves. But if you group them together and like corner villagers, then they do a pretty good job. So we're gonna move over to the pros and cons. So the pros: 220 population, as I said, so great to have that extra population. And one of the greatest things about that is that you can effectively use your Consulate armies, which is one of the problems I had with India because of the population. I needed that population on the battlefield to maintain the line against my opponent. But with that extra population, you can maintain the line good enough to where you send in the 20 or 30 pop Consulate like shipment, and then when that army comes, you have backup and you're still at where you're at on the battlefield. So that was really awesome. We're going to go down late game. They're so good. And this kind of goes with my treaty video where they get the 30 villager boom within a couple minutes. That is really awesome, and that is great to use. But also it's very good because you can have 100 pop or 99 pop villager economy and not have to worry about like having too big of a villager population to where your army can't get large enough. Like you don't have to worry about that because you have the extra population. So you can easily have 99 villages going at it. And they do have some good cards to send in eco-wise too. So that is a bonus there as well. Great council civs. So for the council, they get Germany, which reduced banner cost armies by 30%, which is incredible. If you think about it, if you have Germany while you have the Old Han reforms, you get Old Han reforms for 20% more cost. Like that's so good and so underrated. And then Germany has the heavy cannons and I think Doppels and Uchlans in their shipment too, which is very good. And then you can get wood trickles with them. I'm trying to think. You got Russia, which is amazing. Russia, I think, is the best one overall. What you get with Russia is age 2, age 2 you get the blockhouse, which is great to have. Age 3 you get the fort, which is amazing. You can just send in a fort. And then age 4 you get the factory. So you essentially get a fort and a factory without any cards, which is so good considering like you only have 25 cards in your deck. So you get both of those for basically a super low fee. And then on top of it, the passive bonus for Russia is that you get 10% less villager train time. So that whole combo is really good to have. I honestly stay on them for the majority of my game until it gets late. And then I switch to the British, who have the 10%. I think it's hit points. I don't know if it's hit points and attack or if it's just hit points. It probably is hit points and attack. Double check me on that one. But that 10% is so good, especially with the 8% card that you send in H4. And then they also have the falconets that you can send in, so you get some unit-to-unit artillery, or anti-unit artillery for like heavy infantry, light infantry. And the musketeers are pretty good too. And then obviously the hussars too. And then I think it's the Ottomans for the third one, and it might be France. Ottomans or France, I never use them because the other three are just that good. So yeah, they have some great council civs. Really recommend using it. My thing with the council is that I normally don't use it until I send in the card where you get 300 export, and then like your relations are cheaper because it's a very high investment. Before you send in that card, and then you have a bunch of export if you send that card in. So I normally kind of wait, but if you're doing a rush or something, like for example in my Boxer Rebellion rush, I should have made that and allied with the British to get the 10% bonus, but I didn't do that. I wish I would have done that. I would recommend doing that for rushes. And then if you're booming, of course, obviously side with Russia because you get the quicker build time, and you get the fort that you can toss up somewhere, and going from there. So we're going down War Academy. So this is just a good little side bonus. You only have to build one military building because they train cavalry as well from there. So that's just a good perk to have. It's nothing extremely major, but it's something very good. It saves you wood. And yeah, just very simple. Little bonus there. Old Han Reforms. I went in depth earlier about this. Such a good card. Highly recommend it. And then finally, villages and shipments. So I'm going to talk about the villages first. And you can see there's so many perks that I didn't have enough room. That's how awesome China is at the moment. But for villages, they're really good because you can garrison units at them. So you can toss them out by a hunt that's really far away and not have to worry about your guys getting raided, which is an extreme bonus to have age 2, like not having to worry about raids at all. And then also you can upgrade them, so you only have to build some money before you get upgrades, which is nice, I guess, from a standpoint of like conserving space around your base. Or it could be a negative because you want more houses to like kind of wall off your base. Either way you look at it. But I like them a lot. I think the garrison thing is very important. And then also you can set a home city shipment point there, which is also an extreme perk because you can toss that in a rush. You can build your village by your war academy and then toss out units up forward without having to worry about any of that. So that's also a really good perk to have. And then shipments, we're going to go in here. I'm going to talk about the military ones and then the villager ones. So the military ones are really good age 2. You get like, I think it's 9 pikes. You get a ridiculous amount of pikes age 2. I think it's like 8 or 9. And then you get 7 steppe riders, which is insane amount of cav. Yes, they cost 1 population, but you have 7 cav units that cause chaos. And like I said earlier, if you can like wall off their villagers from getting to their town center, you can do some extreme raiding there. And just having that mass of units is awesome age 2 because people get overwhelmed pretty easily. And then what was I gonna say? Oh, I think there's an 8 Chuko new card, which is really good age 2. I'm trying to think. I feel like there was one more that I can't remember off the top of my head. But overall, China has some really good military cards. If you enjoy sending in military shipments for your rush, I definitely recommend giving China a go. And then also the shipments is the villagers. So it's also a pro and a con. We're going to kind of go into this a little more depth. The pro is the thing I was talking about earlier with the 30 villager boom. If you kind of save, so like the villager cards sent, they don't give you a specific number. They give you a villager per town center and per village. So if you have, for example, 1 village up and 1 town center up, you're only going to get 2 villagers. But if you have your max town center and villagers, I think you can get 10 total. I think you can get 8 villages and then maybe it's 11. I think you can get 8 villages and 3 town centers. So you get like 10 or 11. Then you get 10 or 11 villagers depending on how much you have. So it is a good thing to have if it's later in the game because you get a lot more villagers than what would normally be given in a shipment. But early in the game, it's kind of a pain in the butt because you don't have this card age 2. You can't send in any villagers age 2. And then when you're aging up and age 1, you have to have 2 villages in order to get 3 villagers because you need the 2 villages in the town center. So that can kind of be a pro and con depending how you look at it. So yeah, I think that's all the pros I wanted to touch. Let's go down with the cons here. Artillery, so kind of like with India, they don't have an anti-infantry artillery, which is it is a bummer. I'm going to give it that. But they can easily get it with the falconets from the British and the heavy cannons from the Germans. And I think you can even get, if it's the Ottomans, you can get the great bombards. But I feel like it's not the Ottomans. I feel like it is France. You can get those from the Consulate, and then you have plenty of population to supply that. So it's not an issue, honestly. You just got to be very strategic with it. And then the flamethrowers kind of do a decent job depending on how you use them. So that is definitely a con, though, to not be able to train that straight up. Banner armies can also be a con because later in the game, once you're doing really good, you're rolling, you can kind of see this in some of my games. Because you have such a mix of units, one type of your unit is going to get completely killed off. So for example, I often find that my anti-cavalry, i.e. the pikes or the sword guys, they get killed off first because they're obviously right in the line of battle. And then once they're all killed off, the opponent will just send in a bunch of cav, which is something I need to touch on in a second too. A bunch of cav, and my guys will just get wiped out because I'll have all Tuco Nu or all skirmishers just sitting there. And then they'll just get wiped out, and it'll just go downhill. Speaking of the cav, I probably should have added this in there. China's anti-cavalry is trash. If you're playing against France, do not play as China. You'll get destroyed. Absolutely demolished. The only anti-cav they have are obviously the pikes with the Old Han army, and then the swordsmen with the skirmishers. But there's one specific one. It starts with a K. I can't think of the specific name of it. But you get pikes and then bow cav. And they don't even have that good of multipliers, in all honesty. And it's a pain in the butt to train them. I think you get 3 or 4 cav for 2 pikes. I think it's 3. I think you get 3 cav and 2 pikes. And they don't do that good a job versus cavalry. And it can be an issue at times. If you don't have any cards that send in multipliers with them, you're going to get your butt kind of kicked, and you're going to need greater numbers. So if you're playing against France in a 1v1, do not choose China, or just beat them with the rush. You're going to have to, because later in the game, they'll kick your butt. And then same thing I'm gonna say with India against elephants. Like I cannot see China doing very well against that either. So yeah, those are some side notes. We're gonna keep going down the Cav train time. Like I said earlier, they don't have as many train time cards as the infantry do, so they do suffer in that aspect, and it does take a little while. It does take longer for the cavalry to train. And then last thing is just interesting style. This is kind of with all of the non-European civs. Each one plays differently, so depending on how you like to play, it may be difficult to adapt over to them. Like, for example, having to make the 2 villages early on is really awkward. And then not having specific Villi cards is very awkward also. Sometimes the wonders are a little awkward. Just depending on how you do it, because they send units passively, which I didn't even talk about the wonders really. I'll have to talk about that here in a second. They send in units passively for the most part, and it's not too good of a bonus. I prefer to have more of, like, for example, like the Tokugawa Shrine or something where it gives you cheaper units, or for like India, for example, the one where you gather resources faster around it. Like, I prefer those more than something that gives you units straight up, and you have the one that gives you the rocket crows. But that's just not my style. Maybe for you it is, so that could be a good bonus for you. But the wonders are not that great in my opinion. The first one where you get the food for age up and the units is good, age 2, but after that, like, I don't really care for it, honestly. It takes so long to train those units that it's not really that effective in my opinion. But to each their own. I do know some people that do enjoy that. And then I'm trying to think of the other one. The one where there's one that heals your units. That's all right. And then you have the one that makes oh no, wait, they have the porcelain tower. That is a really good one. Porcelain tower is solid because you basically have factory age 2 or 3 depending on when you build it. There's no immediate bonus when you age up, like you don't get food or wood or anything, but you do get the resource production, and you can choose that on whatever you want. You can choose that on all 3, which is kind of nice, or specifically food, wood, or coin. So that one is good. The other ones I'm a little sketchy about, but that is just kind of preference. So like with that porcelain tower though, you can have that and the factory, so you essentially have 2 factories as China as well, and no cards need to be sent in for that, so big bonuses there. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed China. I thought they were a very good civ. Very underrated in the fact that no one plays with them. And I think that has a lot to do with their play style is different. It's interesting, as I said, especially with the banner armies. But if you give them a shot and give them a lot of playing time, it's going to take a little more time to get used to than India. India, I picked up a little quicker with. But if you do adapt to that, then like you'll be pretty solid. You'll be set. And then having that extra population late game and having the extra eco late game, if you can make it to the late game, you'll do great. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed them. Glad I gave them a shot. And we're going to move on to the Aztecs next. That is the next highest voted civ to go on to. So we'll do that and go on from there. So I hope you guys enjoyed as always. And I will see you guys later.